Come in. Hello. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to RubyConf. It's exciting to see so many people here gathered after so long for the love of a programming language. I personally love Ruby. I know they say that the spot right after lunch is the worst one because people just want to close their eyes. But I actually want to indulge that in a second, if you let me. I want to do an experiment for 1 minute. So actually just go and close your eyes. And if you're home or watching this video, just look away from the screen. Okay, now I want you to picture an object that you own, that you have in your room, like your bedroom or your office. Think of something that you haven't used in a long time. It can be a book that you haven't read in a long time, or maybe a shirt that doesn't fit you anymore. And now I want you to think, how would it feel to get rid of it? Is it pain? Is it joy? Is it anxiety? Or is it freedom? You can open your eyes now. I asked this question to different friends and coworkers, and I got very different responses. Some people really like to collect objects, and they feel good with many items around that. And other people like me are kind of the opposite. I like pristine spaces. I like not having unused objects around me. And I think it might be a personality trait. Different people have different personalities. And I realized that in my case, this doesn't only apply to my real-world environment, but also to my code. I love Ruby, and I especially love opening a blank new Ruby file, or maybe a file that's like 10 or 20 lines of code. Last year, I joined a corporation that has probably one of the biggest Ruby code bases in the world. And to give you some numbers, I actually checked, and the first quarter I was there, the amount of code that was added was 500,000 lines of code. Of course, there's many employees and everything, but for somebody like me, that's overwhelming. I open a Ruby file and it has 2,000 lines of code, and I get a headache. And I don't, just like to complain about it. I want to do something about it. And what I've been doing about it is deleting code. And it might sound weird, but I'm passionate about deleting code. And I've never heard a talk about it, so that's why I'm here to give it. In fact, in my first quarter, I deleted about 50,000 lines of Ruby code. And I'm sure there's more. And I'm sure if you work at a company, you can probably find some as well. So if you're passionate about it, or if I'm going to make you passionate about it, then this talk is about you and about getting to a better place with our code. This talk, as I was saying, really comes from experience. Like, I've made many PRs. And when I was looking back at those, I realized that some pattern was forming. Like, every time I was doing one, there were some steps that I was repeating. To give you the alternative, I didn't just make one PR that says delete 500,000 lines of code or something, because my coworkers would be like, what are you even doing? You just joined. You can't do that. So that's not what I did. I did very small PRs, and they all followed a pattern, and this is what I'm going to talk about today. If you're still in the back, you can come and sit. The technical part hasn't started yet. So this is kind of like this pattern, this process that I found, which is easy to understand. The first step is, how do you find code that can be deleted, right? How do you even get there? So that's kind of like the recognized part. Then, of course, you want to make sure that you can delete it. You just don't want to type backspace and then pray that production doesn't go down. And finally, you probably have coworkers, so they also need to understand what you're doing. They might need to review your code. So there's also some effort that goes there. And so let's get it started. Here's some Ruby code, since we are at RubyConf. So this is a method. This is a pretty short method. It's 9 lines of code. And to give you some context, this is a method. It's called model. And what it does, it displays a model in an ERB view. So you don't have to type HTML and CSS. You can just invoke this method that we wrote in your view, and it accepts some options regarding how the model should display. Okay. So this method already existed. And one day, I opened this file because I had to add an option to this method. So you see options is a hash, and there are different options. So, you might be baffled, like curious about this code, just like I was when I opened. I was like, what is this code doing? Because I know I have to edit it, but let me read it a little bit and understand what's going on. So I see there is an options button style. I might, guess what that is doing. Then I see this conditional options header icon, and I'm like, what is that option exactly? I have this kind of like curiosity. I want to understand the code because maybe I can reuse it. Or maybe that code is actually code that can be deleted. I don't know. So before I even start typing, I get there. I'm just curious, what is this? Is this options header icon even used anywhere, right? So the first tool that we can all reach out for is called finding project. This looks different based on your editor. It can be like, Command-Shift-F. It can be, you can use in your terminal, awk or grep. But basically, what I'm doing here, I see this header icon, and I want to see where else is in the code, who is actually using this option, because that might give me some idea. And turns out that this option is only used in this file. So now I have a suspicion. I'm like, wait, why is there an option that nobody's calling? Maybe I'm on the right track. Maybe this code is not used. However, let's not forget that Ruby has metaprogramming. Maybe somebody, some evil coworker called .send and passed an interpolated string, or things that you can do in Ruby. Maybe you shouldn't, but I can't be sure that I can delete this yet, so I want to go a little deeper. So the next tool I reach out for is Git. Now, not every Ruby programmer uses Git. There are other version control systems, but it's definitely one of the most common. So with Git, what I can do is git blame and the name of the file. What git blame does is for each line of code, it tells me who wrote it, when, and why. There is a commit message, that number that you see at the beginning. It's also called SHA, and it tells me when that line was introduced. So specifically, for instance, I'm looking for this one. The reason why I'm doing this exploration is, well, if somebody added it, maybe that commit message is going to tell me why. What was it doing, right? So I can look more specifically at this commit. There are more seats available if you want to come and join us over there. So there is another Git command to look at a specific commit, and that is Git Show. So you type Git Show with a SHA. So I'm now investigating this commit. It's titled Create an Icon Helper. It was created 3.5 years ago. It indeed adds this options header icon that I'm curious about. And not only it does that, also in a separate file called delete app, it's using this option, which makes sense, right? If somebody added an option and also used it, why would somebody add an option just because, right? So what this is telling me is that 3.5 years ago, somebody added the option and was using it somewhere. But then finding project is telling me that it's not used now. So what happened? Now I'm kind of like Indiana Jones trying to find the Holy Grail. So what I want to do now is look at this other file, delete app.html.erb. What's the story of this file? So there is another Git command for that. It's called Git Log. You type Git Log with a file, and it normally shows the history of the file, but I'm getting an error here. that says, unknown revision or path not in the working tree. This error simply means that the file doesn't exist anymore. So I might think, cool, the file doesn't exist anymore, so I'm good. Like, nobody's calling it. But once again, I want to be more specific. Okay, it doesn't exist anymore, but can I see when it was deleted? Like, can I still look at the history of a file? Turns out you can do that with Git Log. You just need to be more explicit with the options. So you can do Git Log -- follow, which will continue the history of a file even beyond renames. And then you can do the -- to pass the files. So now I can actually see the history of the file, even though it's been deleted. And the most recent commit, called remove the delete app card and model, actually makes sense. It says basically this file was deleted, and it was done 2.5 years ago. So now the story in my mind is complete. 3.5 years ago, somebody added the option and used it somewhere. 2.5 years ago, somebody else removed the only usage of this option from the code, but forgot to delete the option itself, which happens. We're all busy building million-dollar features. So that is the whole story. There was a commit where it was added, and then there was a commit where it stopped being used. So finally, I have everything with me to write what I would call a good commit message. So I can delete the code and type git commit. And the way in which I write the commit messages goes along this way. Remove unused option header icon. It was introduced in 2.7b, but its last invocation was removed in 8.6e. The reason why I call this a good commit message, it's because it's compact, but it's poignant. What I mean by that is that anybody who reviews this commit has all the tools to understand what I'm doing. Especially if you use GitHub, GitHub translates those numbers, those shards, into links. So you can click on it, and it actually takes you to those commits. For this reason, I don't need to type out 3.5 years ago, X did this, and so on, because you can just click on those links and see for yourself. So this commit message is short, but really powerful. And I'm doing this basically to do a favor to myself. What I mean is, I'm going to submit this commit, and at my company, just like many other companies, somebody has to review the code changes. And maybe the person who reviews this is going to be reviewing, tomorrow or 3 days from now. And if I just type something like deleted unused code, they might come back and say, are you sure? What is this for? And 3 days from now, maybe I'm working on another feature, and I have to interrupt myself. And why do that if I have already done all the work today? So this is, kind of like the way in which I share this kind of code with coworkers. The other thing that I do to make sure that my changes are approved in a very easy way is to keep these commits small. So this specific commit, it's just deleting those lines of code. So when somebody sees it, it's like, oh, okay, I get it. Like, I look at the code, I get what's happening. I can click, I can ask, but like, it's not 300 additions, 400 deletions, and so on. Now, normally, when I find code that can be deleted, I'm in the middle of a gigantic feature. I'm like, oh, I'm doing all these things. I'm building the next big feature. But now I also want to do this. So it's easy to put it all together in one commit. It's easy to think, I can just put it all together. I can just do one commit, and they have a commit message that's like a book saying it's doing all these things at once. But that would still not be nice to my coworkers. So instead, what I suggest is that if you're working on a big feature, pause whatever you're doing, just put it aside, make a small commit to delete code, and then bring your work back. In fact, this pause, it's not hard to do. There is a Git command for that. It's called Git Stash. So let me show you an example. Let's imagine I'm working on a feature, and meanwhile, I've already touched this file. I've already added another file, and now I'm like, wait, I want to pause this. I want to put this aside and delete. So what you can type is you can type Git Stash. If you add the -- included untracked option, which is also simply -u, it's going to stash all the files, including the untracked ones, which by default are not. So remember to use that option. So you stash, then you do your very small commit, you push it, and then you bring your work back with Git Stash apply. So maybe this is simple, maybe this is complicated, and I'm here to hear your feedback after the talk, but it's really just a process. So if you are in the mindset and you really just want to make sure that some code gets deleted and that the approval for that PR is just a thumbs up, this is something that has worked for me so far. In the second part of this talk, I want to talk about a couple of other techniques that are a little more advanced, but they still fit in this process. The first one is recognize. I said before, I happened to open a file that had some unused code, and I saw it, right? But if you work in a very big code base, you probably have files that you never open, and maybe those are the files that have code that can be deleted, so it's kind of like a paradox. How do you even find it if you never open them, right? So I developed my own strategy. I don't know if anybody does that, but the way in which I do it is with code coverage. Code coverage is a tool that's normally used for testing. It's available in almost every programming language, and in Ruby, there is one that I really like, which is called Simple Call, which looks like this. So normally, when you do code coverage in testing, you write your test, you run them, and then this tool comes up and tells you which lines of code have been executed by your test or covered, so you know if you're like missing some tests. But nothing prevents you from using these tools in development or in production, which is what I do. So in development, I start the tool, then locally I just play around with the app, try to hit all the methods and stuff for a while, and then stop the tool, and this thing comes up telling me which lines of code I have executed. And sometimes I do this in production as well. I start it, I let users roam around for like an hour, do whatever they need, they can do, and then stop it after an hour, and the same thing pops up. So if a file has 100% coverage, it means that it's been completely executed, like all the lines are used for one reason or another. But if that's not the case, that gives me a hint. Maybe there is a method that customers have been going around for an hour, it's never been executed. I have a hint. Next time I have some spare time, maybe I can start there. I don't have to just randomly open a file and hope that I find the good one, especially in a very big code base. So code coverage has helped me doing that, and it just gives me maybe hints or places where I can start. And there might be other static analysis out there that do similar thing. The good thing about code coverage tools is that probably you already have them in your code base for testing, so and they're really easy to use. Finally, I want to talk about another technique, and here is where you need to be awake, because this is the hard part. It's another Git command that I want to talk about. So this is the exact same slide I had before, where I said, hey, this delete app file was using the option that I was mentioning, but this file is gone, has been deleted. So it's pretty clear to understand that it's not invoking the code anymore. The file has been deleted completely. So this is kind of like an easy scenario. Now I want to talk about another scenario, which goes like this. The file itself still exists, but it has different code. 3.5 years ago, somebody was using the option in this file. Today, the file is still there, but the code is different. So in other words, 3.5 years ago, the code that I'm looking for was there. Today, I do a finding project and it's not there, it's not in that file. So somewhere in the middle, somebody went and changed this file and removed the only usage of that option. And now the question is, where? When? There might be dozens or hundreds of commits in the middle. I don't want to go one by one and check. Maybe there's hundreds of them. So is there a faster way to do that? There is. And it's a command that's called Git Bisect. So to the right, these are all the commits that have ever affected this file. I know somewhere here, there's one commit that removed the only usage of that option. Where is it? So first you type git bisect start. Then you type git bisect good with the very last commit. Good means the option was invoked, the code was there. We know that. Then you type git bisect bad with the most recent commit. We know the option is not there. When you type this, Git takes you exactly in the middle. That's why it's called bisect. It takes you, it doesn't matter how many commits there are, it takes you in the middle. And it says, what about this commit? Is the code here invoking that option or not? Now you have to do that work. You can use find the project. What I use is grep-c. It counts how many occurrences of header icon are in that file. In this case, 0 means it's not using the option. So now all I have to type is git bisect bad, because I know this is the code is not there. And so what git bisect does now, it takes me to the middle of the second half. It says, what about here? And now you do this again. So was it there? In this case, it was there. So you just type git bisect good. Now that takes you to the half of the third quarter. And you do that. And it's only 4 or 5 steps until you get to a single commit, which is the commit that Bisect calls the first bad commit. And in this case, is this 19273. So it only takes maybe a minute to just go bisecting and finding that one. And then once you're done with bisect, you type git bisect reset to just go back to your normal work. So now that we have this 1927, we can use that in the same way we were using before. We can say, remove unused option header icon. It was introduced, but its last invocation was removed in 1927. And people can click there and see that it's not that the file was deleted, it's that that specific line of code was deleted. And then the rest of the commit is similar. So to wrap up, these are all the Git commits I mentioned in my talk. And I find them pretty useful to delete code. The first one is you're just curious, you're looking at some code, when or why was this added, you do a git blame. Then maybe you find a line of code that you want to see what else happened at the same time. You can do Git Show with that commit. If you're looking at a specific file and you want to know the history, even if the file was renamed or deleted, you can do this Git Log with those options. And if you know there was a commit that changed something, but you don't know which one because you have years of them, you can do it in a rapid way with Git Bisect. With all these, you have in your hands all you need to write a good commit message. So first of all, if you're in the middle of something, put it away, stash it, do Git Stash. Then write the commit. My suggestion is to never use Git commit with the -m option, meaning inline in your terminal. Just do Git commit and open your editor so then you have all the space that you need to write your message. And then you can bring your work back with Git Stash apply. To conclude, I just want to mention, as I said at the beginning, this is a talk that really comes from experience and from passion. And it's really not about looking back. I never really care about who left the code there or why it's there. I'm perfectly aware that these things happen. Probably, it might have been me. I forgot about it. And that's really not relevant. To me, doing this, it's kind of similar to when you go to the beach and there's like a piece of trash, and some people don't even notice it. And then other people see it and they think, well, I didn't leave it there, so I don't have to pick it up. And then, some people, we pick it up because it doesn't matter. We don't want to like linger in the past. It's just more about building a better future. Finally, I also want to thank the committee for accepting my talk, because in my mind, this was kind of like a very personal, and even like weird talk, but it actually was accepted. So if you're in the audience and you have any passion or any theme or anything that's related to Ruby, and you have doubts and you think, well, it will never get accepted. Well, mine was. So you really only have to submit an abstract, which is like 300 words, and I just encourage you all to do it, because maybe next time you're going to be standing on this stage and giving a talk. That concludes my presentation. Thanks for coming, and have a great rest of your day.